Yeah. Now, families, some of you know that I'm also a double eagle. I have 2 degrees from American University. But some of you may not know that I'm also a graduate of our AU Abroad programs. I had the opportunity to study in London when I was an undergrad. And I got the chance to live with a host family in London. I had some really transformative experiences. I got my internship credit. I traveled all over Europe. It was really phenomenal. And I was telling my panelists tonight that I am so excited because decades later, I won't tell you how many, here I am now getting ready to meet up with my host brother from when I lived in London, who will be in town in Washington, D.C., performing on stage on Monday. And I've got VIP tickets to see him kill it on the drum set. So I'm super excited to be introducing these opportunities to you and to your students through AU Abroad. Before I turn things over to my panelists for this evening, I've got just a couple housekeeping items to review. One, we're going to reserve plenty of time at the end of tonight's session to answer your questions. But there are about 500 of you joining us tonight and only a few of us here to help answer questions. If we don't get to answer your very specific questions this evening, I'm going to encourage you to email us at auparent@american.edu, and we'll follow up to make sure that you're getting all of your questions answered. Lastly, you're certainly welcome to reach out to us at any time with any question. And with that, I'm going to go, oh, I should mention, you can submit your questions tonight live through the Q&A box on your screen at any time. With that, I'm going to allow my colleagues over here to go ahead and share out their content and give you the overview. I'm turning to Mark Hayes to give us the presentation. Thanks.
So, hello everyone. It's my pleasure to be with you. As Karen said, I'm Mark Hayes. I'm the director of AU Abroad. So I've been at AU for close to 17 years now. So I've been here doing this quite a bit. My colleague, Courtney Pollack, who's the assistant director, will be joining me. So we will be doing kind of a tag team on the presentation. I'll start to get us all, kind of kick us off, and then she'll join and go over a few more details I think that'll be particularly interesting to you. We are really excited to kind of be moving into the post-pandemic mode at AU Abroad. We've been ramping up study abroad since fall of last year. And this semester, we're back up almost to pre-pandemic levels. We have just over 400 undergraduate students studying in 26 countries. We have a few still countries that their borders are closed that we haven't been able to send students to, but we expect to be in pretty much full operational status for fall 2022. So we are kind of getting back to business as usual, or big business as the new usual. So we understand that most of you are probably family or parents of first or second year students. A few of you probably are for third and fourth year students. So what we're going to talk about today is kind of how we present the start of the process to the students, what they need to think about and what they need to do when, and then kind of go into some details over the types of programs, the types of options, how financing work, what the costs are, and then kind of the nitty-gritty of how actually people apply to go abroad. So we won't go on for too long, maybe about 20, 25 minutes. So there should be plenty of time for questions at the end, and we're happy to stay on as long as we can to answer them for you. So the first thing is overall, we have about 130 different countries, 130 programs in 30 countries. So we're right now getting back to our full level of 30 countries where we can send students. We do programs in the semester, in the year, and the summer. Now, traditionally, most AU students will go abroad for a full semester. About 80% of our cohorts go abroad during a full semester. About 10% go abroad during a full academic year, and about 10% in the summer. So most of what we kind of gear ourselves toward is semester-long or year-long programs, though we do have a significant number of summer offerings, not as many as during the semesters, but things that kind of meet some core needs. And we also allow students to be flexible to do programs outside of our portfolio during the summer. Now, the other thing to key remember is that no matter what your student is majoring in, if they're double majoring, if they're majoring and have 2 minors, we have a program for them. So we start this whole process by really pushing students toward our resources on their major and study abroad, where we work with their academic units very, very closely to vet a smaller list of programs where it is absolutely possible for them to get credit for their major requirements. Because our goal, as it is yours, is to make sure your students finish AU on time, do not delay their graduation, do not cause anybody to have to pay any additional money for tuition, so that everything stays on track. And for the most part, we're able to do that even for students who study abroad for a full academic year. The other thing to know is that previous knowledge of a language is not necessarily a barrier to certain countries. So about 60% of our program options abroad, many of which are in non-English speaking countries, still allow students to go there without prior knowledge of the language, but they will start learning the language when they're on site. So just because it's a program, say in Italy or in Denmark or in Germany or other places, it doesn't necessarily mean if you haven't studied the language beforehand that you can't go there. But we definitely want the students to be able to take the language while they're there. Now, if we look at kind of a step-by-step sequencing, for those of you who are parents or family members of a first-year student, it's really a time to kind of just explore. There really isn't much need to even come in and talk to our office at this point, other than to kind of research areas of interest, go through our website, talk to your first-year advisor, talk to faculty members and others, and kind of exploring what your potential options will be in the future. We want primarily first-year students to be comfortable on campus, get their feet on the ground, and kind of start to migrate toward the areas they want to concentrate in, because their academic focus will really dictate what the best options are for studying abroad. Now, once movement students go from the first year into the second year, and they start getting an academic advisor within their academic unit or their major, that's when more of the detailed discussions start. And that always starts with the academic advisor, because at the end of the day, their academic advisor has to authorize them to go abroad. So this is our check to make sure that everybody stays on track and is going someplace where they know what the requirements are, they know what they need to do before they go abroad, and they know what courses they can take abroad that will transfer back and meet those requirements. So that's absolutely the first step. Once they've started to kind of narrow their academic needs in terms of what courses do they need, what types of classes do they need, that's when they start kind of transitioning to our office and starting talking about the nitty-gritty of what the best programs are for them to meet those academic needs. Now, the key thing here is planning. At each step, the more a student plans up front their academic program, the more flexibility they have when they go abroad. So some students are exceptional at this planning process, and they basically are able to do a lot of electives while they're abroad, and that gives them the ability to explore things that they might not be able to explore here on main campus. And we encourage that if they have that flexibility to do. Now, some students may change their mind about their major. They may decide to add a minor. We think that's the whole beauty of the American education system, is that we have a 4-year university degree to give people time to explore. So if there's a change in track or they didn't get something they needed earlier, that's where we're really kind of paying attention to making sure they get what they need while they're abroad. Now, depending on when the students go abroad, the vast majority of our students will study abroad their 3rd year, evenly dispersed between 1st and 2nd semester. A good percentage will also go abroad in the senior year. Obviously, this year we see a lot more seniors going abroad due to kind of delays because of the pandemic. But normally it's about maybe 80% of the students will go abroad their junior year. A few may go abroad 2nd semester, sophomore year. That's the earliest usually students can go abroad if they're doing a semester long program, and probably about 10% generally during their senior or last year. So when they start moving into the application process, that's usually done the semester prior to going abroad. So for example, if there are any, say, sophomores now who are going to go abroad in fall 2022, they start that process generally at the beginning of January. And then most of our application deadlines range over the month of March for the most part. And then we do a lot of the next phase of programming from April throughout the summer, depending on the start of their programs. So generally, as long as they're getting the application started the semester before they go abroad, they're in good shape. Then their third and fourth year, we send them off to enjoy the world, to have the best experience of their lives, and tell you all the wonderful things they're doing. And then we help them reintegrate them back on campus when they come here. So this is a general timeline of when to think about what. Now, within the broad scope of that, then kind of as students start to think about, they've got their academic needs, they know what they need, then there are different program elements. So we have three basic types of programs that students can study on when they're abroad. The first is what we call a structured program. So kind of what the name kind of begets is that it's a very set. So that means there's a lot of structure to it in terms of the curriculum, which usually means less choice, but probably very focused in their academic area. A very high level of on-the-ground program support. So it's very much built toward maybe people who are a little bit kind of anxious about the study abroad process, kind of want more help navigating kind of integration into a new culture, and probably be able to expect the same levels of support in general as they would have on main campus here for a lot of areas. Now, in most of these cases also, students can have the opportunity to do a structured internship for credit. Living situations vary. Some are in homestays, some are in student residences, but in the same vein, a lot of that process is managed by the program or by us directly in terms of where the students are being housed. And some kind of key program examples of this are our programs in Belgium, the ones in Denmark, a lot of the language immersion programs in Jordan and other countries. So that's kind of really kind of what we call the highest level of support and the most integrated program, and the program that's probably the one most focused on specific academic areas. Now, if you go to the other end of the spectrum, we have what we call direct enrollment. And this is kind of going to the much more kind of independent side. Students who want more freedom while they're abroad. They want to more be able to dictate how their life is going to go day to day. They want a wide variety of courses to choose from because they're normally going to be directly enrolling in institutions abroad. A lot of these are in the UK, but we also have them across Europe, in Asia, and also in Latin America. Students generally need to be very strong self-advocators for these programs because there's a bureaucracy that they'll have to navigate, both in terms of on their process of getting there and in terms of when they're at the institution abroad. So big examples here are most of the big programs in the United Kingdom. So Exeter, London School of Economics and Political Science, Oxford, University College London, King's College, University of Edinburgh, which Courtney gets to deal with. All of our programs in New Zealand and Australia, and a lot of our programs in Latin America too. Now, if you go kind of in the middle, so we take a little bit of the structured program, a little bit of the direct enrollment, and we also have these hybrid programs that give the kind of the best of both worlds in the sense. They do some structured elements, usually based at a program center abroad, with a generally higher level of program support. There'll be a group of other kind of American students or AU students there, but you'll also be doing a few of your courses at an institution abroad. So you'll do maybe 1 or 2 courses at a local university, maybe 1, 2, or 3 courses at a program center, so that you get a mix and you kind of get a bigger variety of what you're actually experiencing. So a few examples of those are our programs in Chile and Spain, specifically for our business students. Junior year Munich and Germany, which also Courtney advises for. So among these 3, usually our breakup is about a third will do structured programs, about a third will do direct enroll programs, and about a third will do hybrid. So it is really much a chance for then students to kind of understand where they best fit and kind of what they want out of their experience. Now, stepping back one, I do want to say though, AU also offers our own 3 study centers abroad, 1 in Brussels, 1 in Nairobi, and 1 in Spain. So these are the programs that we actually have full direct control over. We're probably about a third of our students go. Brussels is a fully structured program. Madrid offers both structured and hybrid programs. And the ones in Nairobi are mostly structured with some elements of hybrid with the local universities that we work with. So we offer a bit and bits of each of those locations for our program centers. Now, one other item I know there were a lot of questions on were about summer opportunities. A lot of what we talk about program types and what with the experience we talk about are geared towards students going along for longer periods during the semester or the year. At our program centers, we do offer summer programs every summer, a lot focused on internships. So all 3 sites offer credit-bearing internships for the summer. In Spain, we also offer language intensive programs in the summer, as well as a really unique art history course for students, which is really good for first-year students also because they can go abroad in the summer right after their first year, that allows them to do some of their core requirements here at AU, primarily one of their habits of mind courses while they're abroad. So we just started offering this pre-pandemic, and now we're continuing that as it went to a virtual format during the pandemic. Also, a lot of students in the summer will do independent programs. They'll do things outside of our umbrella, go experience things, and they only really need to work with our office if it's a question of trying to transfer the credits back for the summer. Sometimes that helps the student, sometimes it does not. So we really try to talk with them then about if they're doing these experiences in the summer, do they really need to bring the credit back? What's the best options to do that? And if there really is a desire to do that, then we work on them. There's a petition process to actually help them manage bringing that credit back to the university. Okay. Now at this point, I'm going to segue over into Courtney and let her talk all about the money.
Thank you very much, Mark. I'm sure a lot of you have many questions about the financial aspect of this experience, and hopefully in the next about 10 minutes or so, we can answer a lot of questions that you've been thinking about. So basics about how financial sort of everything works when students go abroad. First and foremost, all financial aid will apply in the semester that your student goes abroad, except for work study. This is because students are maintaining their matriculation at AU. They are earning AU institutional credit, so they are therefore eligible to receive all of their AU aid, loans, grants, payment plans, as well as any federal aid. 50% of programs that we offer through AU Abroad cost less than a semester at American universities. Now, that can be a little confusing sometimes because I just said that you're earning AU institutional credit and paying AU tuition as normal. So how could a program be less? That has to do with the cost of living. At lots of our programs abroad, student housing is quite subsidized. The cost of living is lower in places, a lot of places that are a little lower than Washington, D.C., et cetera. So the cost of attendance is less than a semester on AU's campus. We also have additional scholarships based on need that we offer through our office, AU Abroad Grants. We also work very closely with the Office of Merit Awards to make sure students are very well informed about nationally competitive scholarships that they may be eligible for as well. So some upfront costs that you want to be anticipating when your student says that they want to be studying abroad in the near future. All of our programs have a $50 application fee that you pay in order to make your application complete. Students pay this in their AU Abroad application portal. 2 weeks after acceptance, typically in a program, we ask students to submit a non-refundable $500 deposit to confirm their attendance. Now, this is a deposit. This goes back on the student's Eagle Service account after the program has begun. Obviously, if there were some extenuating circumstances like a global pandemic that had to cause significant changes or cancellations to programs, then that word non-refundable can sometimes be a little bit flexible, right? But in general, students are submitting that deposit saying, yes, I am going to the University of Edinburgh, or I am going to go on the Clashes and Alliances program in Spain. And we expect students to have that money deposited 2 weeks after they are accepted. Depending on the program, there might be other upfront costs that you need to anticipate. Visa costs for certain programs in certain countries can be quite high. Some visa costs in certain countries can be upwards of nearly $1,000. Other programs in other countries have no visa costs for US citizens. So it's important that you're examining the budget sheets, which I'll get to in a second, to see what would the immigration costs be. Airfare usually needs to be purchased in advance of the semester starting, unsurprisingly, but sometimes it needs to be purchased in advance of a visa appointment. And so that's something that you might need to anticipate as well. Sometimes, depending on the program, housing needs to be paid in its entirety upfront in advance, or there's a deposit that needs to be paid to a third-party provider to secure your student place in that housing. So, how do you know exactly what the finances will be for your student's chosen program? You are in luck because on our website, we have brochure pages dedicated to each individual program that we offer through AU Abroad. And as you can see in the screenshot, there are different tabs. They give lots of pertinent information like important dates, information about academics, student life, visa information on whether it's required or not, and of course, the budget sheet. Now, the entire staff at AU Abroad spends a lot of time and energy making sure that these budget sheet estimates are as up to date as possible every single semester, right? They are estimates, but we do keep an eye on this and do a lot of mathematical calculations to give students a good idea of what the cost of attendance would be on their chosen program. So to explain budget sheets, here we have side-by-side examples of budget sheets from our website for two different kinds of programs. On one side, you see the budget sheet for King's College London. This is a direct enrollment program that Mark was just speaking about. And on the other side, you're going to see the budget sheet for the Spain Iberian Experience program. This is one of our sort of gems at one of our centers in Madrid. It's a very popular program with students in the spring. So the top levels of the budget sheet you'll see are relatively identical. You'll see tuition as normal, the AU technology fee, which allows your student to access their portal and their email that they pay every semester as normal, and then a projected AU Abroad fee. Now, these AU Abroad fees vary during the semester, anywhere from the minimum, which is $800 US, to upwards of over $8,000 for DIS Copenhagen. Now, what a budget sheet AU Abroad fee indicates, and we'll get to that slide next to see exactly what's sort of included in that fee, because obviously not all fees are going to be equal, right? So in the first half of the budget sheet, you will see what is billable on the AU student account. It's the subtotal. This is the number that shows up on Eagle Service. This is the number that's used when financial aid or loans or payment plans are applied. Below the billable subtotal, you are going to see what is the non-billable total, so subtotal, which is what we call out-of-pocket expenses. These are expenses that are not going to be billed through Eagle Service and not going to be paid through American University. So things such as room and board for King's College London. Students will pay that partner institution directly for their housing. Things like food, international airfare. We do not offer group flights. So we estimate what international airfare would cost from Washington, D.C. to the chosen destination. The cost of a new U.S. passport, if your student does not have a valid passport or needs to renew a passport, the estimated visa immigration fees, local transport, books and academic materials, and then estimated personal expenses, which I always tell your students is essentially toothpaste and shampoo for the semester. So at the bottom, you'll see that the non-billable amounts are quite different for these two programs. But even though for Spain Iberian Experience, the program fee is a lot higher, the total, which is in the bottom circled in dark purple, the total cost of attendance is actually less in Spain than it would be at this direct enrollment program with a low AU Abroad fee. So to get to those AU Abroad fees, you'll just keep scrolling down on our website, but for this presentation, we have to go to a new slide so you can somewhat see what they say. So below the budget sheet that is existing on our website for fall, spring, and academic year semester terms, you will see exactly what the AU Abroad fee includes. So for King's College London, $800 AU Abroad fee, it is covering administrative support, mailings that are sent on your student's behalf, transcript translation and processing, and most importantly, the emergency travel insurance that all travelers on official AU business, students, staff, and faculty are required to be insured under. For Iberian Experience, where you saw that program fee was a lot higher, you'll see that it includes a lot more. It's going to include homestay. It's going to include breakfast and dinner. It's going to include field trips, excursions, walking tours, on-site orientation and activities, in addition to all of those other things that I mentioned, right? So administrative support, transcript translation and processing, and then emergency insurance. So we have lots of important notes at the bottom of those budget sheets, and it's important that you look at them because I think sometimes parents don't know where to look to see where did this number come from, and you can see exactly how it would be calculated. We also every semester update what the cost of attendance is on AU's campus, so you can see whether or not the cost of attendance is estimated to be more or less than a semester at AU. So basic requirements, I did see some questions in the chat about basic requirements to study abroad. So students are required at the baseline to have a 2.75 cumulative GPA to study abroad for the semester or the academic year. They're required to have a 2.5 cumulative GPA to study abroad in a short-term experience in the summer. Students are required to meet with all of their academic advisors, major and minor, to make sure that they understand what the requirements are when they go abroad and what the requirements would be when they return. When can a student study abroad? So most programs, our baseline has to be a second semester sophomore, which means that your student will apply when they are a first semester sophomore, not now in their first year, right? They won't be applying until over the summer or in the beginning of the fall semester. For students who want to study abroad in the summer, we require them to complete their first year at AU. So if you have a first year student who's interested in studying abroad this summer, a lot of our deadlines have been extended, not all of them, but some of them have been, including some of our summer experiences, if your student was looking for an international experience after their first year on AU's campus. Do keep in mind that when we're calculating the year that a student has to do with how many semesters they have completed at an institution of higher education. So if your student came in with 60 credits from AP or IB credit, they're not a sophomore in the eyes of many of our partners after just completing 2 semesters on AU's campus. So we want to see on a transcript a student with 1 completed first year and 1 fall semester registration on campus when they are applying as second semester sophomore. Also, students are not permitted to have any open conduct issues or be on any disciplinary or academic probation when they are studying abroad. So those are the baseline requirements of what we at AU Abroad require of students in order to apply, right? But as Mark mentioned, we work with a lot of partners, and those partners may have additional requirements. When partners have additional requirements, we let students know that by having that information prominently displayed on the brochure page. So you can very easily see when you look on a program brochure page, what is the GPA minimum? In this case, it's a 3.3 for this program in England. Most of our partners in the UK require students to be juniors, so they are not permitted to study in the UK as second semester sophomores. This will also give you different information in this fact sheet area of our brochure page of sort of what's the language of instruction at the institution, what are some of the housing options, and as I saw, one parent had asked the program type, so whether or not a program is direct enrollment, structured, or hybrid.
Yeah, and one point I want to add there to with this also. So I think it's also an important distinction to make that the process of applying to study abroad is nothing like the process to apply to going to university in the first place, which is, we know, a very highly competitive, stress-inducing experience for many of you and many of your students. So the intent here is why we have so much detail about what the requirements are, is that as long as students meet the requirements and go through the application process and produce all the stuff they need to produce, in 99.9% of the cases, they will get their choice of program as long as they meet those requirements. So we try to be as transparent up front so that people don't go down a path they can't go far, can't get along. There are obviously a few programs that are competitive, not very many, but in those cases, we advise the students and we always work on making sure they have a backup option that we are confident they will be able to get into. So the intent is for this, that they really need to do their homework up front to think about where they want to go, because we generally only allow students to apply to one program unless we know that program is highly competitive, and then we allow them a backup option. So most of the work before they apply is done before they actually apply and start that process. But we are very transparent about what the requirements are and what they need to be at or where they need to be in order to go to each and every program.
So sort of next steps, how do you connect with AU Abroad? So we have a general email inbox that we monitor every day, auabroad@american.edu. You won't always get a response from the auabroad@american.edu address if it's very specific. We often farm those out to the person concerned, so the advisor who is in charge of that program. We have an office on campus that we are having in-person and both hybrid appointments for students. We have a Facebook page and an Instagram page. If you are into social media, we're very happy to always highlight the fun and of course, like the educational value students are getting out of their semesters abroad. We love to show students what students abroad are doing right now, so that they can get excited for what they plan to do in the future. Thank you all very much for your attention during this presentation.
So I think we can move on to the questions now, Karen. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. I think everybody's had plenty of time to see the contact information, so you can see our faces.
That's excellent.
Yeah.
I'm so glad we've got so much time because there have been some great questions that came up. Mark, I'm actually wondering if it might be useful to share your screen to just show folks like that search and filter field from the top of the AU Abroad website.
Well,
right, where they can oversee, because there's so many options, right? And then we can kind of talk a little bit about how we might drill down and find these. But Mark, the first question I wanted to pitch to you, which is kind of an overview, and you might have touched on this in your introductory remarks, but what percentage of AU students typically study abroad?
So generally, if we look pre-pandemic, we're running about 65% of all undergraduate students will study abroad before they graduate. That number's fluctuated between 65 and 70% historically, and that's one of the highest percentages in the country of any university or college. So we're quite proud of that number. So it is de facto what most students expect to do while they're here. And so all of the academic groups we work with are geared with that notion, even from the very beginning, that students are going to want to study abroad.
Awesome, thank you. So one of the other kind of general questions is really for families who are wondering, typically how many credits convey with a study abroad? I mean, are we talking like 12 credits? Is it 15 credits? Is there a general baseline or range?
Sure. So students always have to maintain a full academic load when they're studying abroad, which is between 12 and 17 credits. Almost, probably, Courtney, you can correct me, I think about probably 95-6% of the students will do a minimum of 15 credit hours while they're abroad. Many do 16 or 17 credit hours. And it's usually the exception that they will do 12 credit hours. Usually there's something specifically extenuating that's happening on why they're doing that. But generally it's a 15 credit hour or even more load while they're abroad. And since the pandemic, we've also allowed students to do now one online course abroad. If there's a very specific requirement they have here at AU that we may have difficulty meeting for them abroad, and is offered online. So there we've tried to maintain that flexibility post-pandemic, or as we're moving post-pandemic, I should better say. And that's still an option for students studying abroad in the fall and into the future.
Excellent, thank you. You know what, Mark, I'm gonna ask a follow-up because I know that with all of the questions and uncertainty of the last 2 years, we had a lot of students who were engaging in remote studies with these partner institutions overseas. So, is that still an option? Can students still do like an online only course of study, stay here in the US, but take classes at Nairobi?
Yeah, so there are more flexible options now. So we're generally, I think we have one student this semester who's doing his full program online because he was supposed to go to Australia and the borders were closed at the point in time he needed to do, and he opted to do a fully remote program. Now, going forward into the future, I don't anticipate that will be an option to do everything online, but we will continue to offer, for example, online courses every single semester and in the summer through our 3 centers abroad, which we've had really strong enrollments at. So a lot of our first-year students and others have been taking some of the art history courses that we've been offering in Spain. We've been offering courses that support public health students in Nairobi. So this is a really unique option to actually round out students' curriculum with experience with our faculty and our experts abroad to kind of supplement what they're doing here. And in a lot of these cases, the courses are taught asynchronously, which means there's not a specific time students need to meet. So it's been very helpful as students try to fulfill their overall schedule and be able to add these things in. So that we're going to continue in the future. And we're also continuing in the future at a few of our sites, virtual internships. Those were really popular during the pandemic for obvious reasons, but we've also shown that they still want to be people, there's still a desire to do some of these especially in some interesting locations where students want to gain experience. And we're going to continue in that into the future also.
Excellent. So we were talking for a moment about the sort of credit load, and I think that's a really good segue to address some of the questions that families have raised about how we finance a study abroad program, which scholarships might convey. Do athletic scholarships carry over? Does GI Bill or yellow ribbon benefits, do they carry over? Can we talk about how we make this affordable and within reach for our students and families?
Yeah, since Courtney was our finance specialist today and did all of our lovely budget sheets, I'm going to let her address that one.
Thank you, Mark. So those particular scholarships are quite specific, right? So an athletic scholarship is the understanding is that the student would be engaging in athletics on AU's campus. We've certainly sent scholar athletes abroad before, but I would highly recommend, if you are a parent that is using specifically like the 9/11 GI, yellow ribbon, or an athletic scholarship, to speak with the financial aid office about what those particular implications are. I do know that the GI Bill recently changed their criteria for allowing students to use that when they studied abroad, which we were not very happy about in our office and in our industry. Whether or not anything has changed after the pandemic would be best sort of sent over to the Office of Veteran Affairs for just super clarity on those.
And here on our website, if you're going to go through our getting started area, then financing study abroad, we have a whole list of scholarships we offer through our office, both for semesters and summers, some from other offices, and then all these other financial aid opportunities are external scholarships that students can apply for, some program specific, some region specific, but it's a really, really wealth of information and looking at options to kind of supplement the funding for study abroad.
Thank you. So I know I've been responding to a number of families this evening about with their questions about what do they do for housing if their student only wants to go abroad for half the year. So I'll just share that we don't have our colleagues from housing joining us for this evening, but your students certainly can, when they go through the application process to secure housing for the upcoming year, they can select whether they would like to apply for a fall only or spring only housing option. But Mark, I know we'd spent some time being really deliberate about making sure that we had backup plans for students because COVID remains such a question. So maybe you can give just a little overview about the kind of steps and advisement we give to students so that we know that we've got those plan Bs all in place.
Yes, we have plans A, B, C, D, E, F since the last 2 years. So, I mean, we are really still operating out of an abundance of caution. So even though things are moving toward a more of a kind of normal set of operations or new normal operations, we still want to be very cautious because things we know can change quickly. So the one big one is we are still having all students still register for courses on campus. So any students who are intending to study abroad in the fall semester, we're still asking them to go through the on-campus registration process just so they can secure places and courses they need, especially as they move into kind of their third and fourth year. So we keep those registrations active for quite a while before we will move them over to their study abroad registration if things do change. So we're kind of monitoring that kind of, I would say, dynamically. And so if we are relatively confident early summer that everything looks very clear to go, we'll make those changes then. Same way, like as Courtney mentioned, if we cancel a program or have to cancel a program, we will do everything possible to make sure that we minimize any financial losses. So we make sure we look at what the deadlines are for housing requirements. We basically give guidance on putting off purchasing airfare and other things so that we minimize the financial impact from anything people have to back out of. So as we go through each step of the process and we move from kind of application acceptance to kind of what we call pre-departure, which is kind of all the planning that goes into before you depart, that's where we get in the nuts and bolts of when you should do what, so that we kind of mitigate any potential losses or any potential adverse outcomes. And we look at backup options if things don't go right. We're getting more like fluid. I think it's very rare now that I would expect to cancel a program. There would have to be something actually, I mean, the biggest issue coming up with us now is more geopolitical, looking at what's going on between Russia and Ukraine right now, which is why we're not sending students to Russia. So it has nothing to do with COVID. It has something to do with other issues that are coming up, which we know can happen very quickly, and it's very dynamic. So those are also things we monitor very quickly and very kind of carefully to make sure that we're reacting, as kind of in the best interest of everyone, so that we mitigate those risks and mitigate any negative fallout from it.
Excellent, thank you. There are a number of folks who are asking, do we recommend, do we advise students to do more than one semester abroad, or do we see a lot of students who take a full year or maybe a summer and a semester?
Courtney?
Yeah, I think that the feedback just unanimously is students who study abroad for a year have a more immersive, a more fruitful experience. Now, it's not possible for all students to be able to do that because of maybe their desired location and their majors or other sort of, ideas. We have students who study abroad in 2 different locations within the same year. We have students who study abroad in a spring semester and then in a fall semester in a different location. And that is really where your student's AU Abroad Advisor is going to come into play. Because if you have a student who has these 2 ideas of where they want to go, very quickly we can let them know if we recommend, do those dates line up? If it's a Northern Hemisphere and Southern Hemisphere school, is the visa process very complicated and requires the student to be in the United States in advance, or perhaps even in Washington, D.C.? Is it better to do one program first versus the other? So we definitely have students do 2 different locations. We've had some students go back to the same location, maybe studying abroad spring semester sophomore year, and then going back again later in their time at AU because they couldn't get enough of it. We've had students extend their time as is permitted within like immigration. We have less students sort of go home. I did see something in the chat with if a student goes for 1 semester and they need to withdraw, that's something that, they would want to discuss with their study abroad advisor about what that would look like for sure. In terms of unrecoverable costs that might be, incurred just because of paying for housing for a full year contract, for example. But we have lots of students who study abroad for a year, or students who study abroad for a semester and say that they wish they had been able to make it a year, because it is quite transformative for your students.
Thanks. So one of the big questions that we're seeing tonight in the chat is really like some clarification on the timelines. It's my understanding, correct me team if I'm wrong, but there's so many of these programs and so many of the schools that we're partnering with are on their own academic schedules. So we don't have a a specific AU deadline for a registration for a specific term, right? It really kind of rolls with the programs. Is that correct?
So on our website, we actually have a list of deadlines that students can reference and see where the deadlines are. As you can see on the homepage for AU Abroad that Mark was just showing, we've extended a lot of our deadlines to the 24th of March, not all of them, but here right on our website, upcoming deadlines shows you all the good information. Now, some partner institutions have different deadlines than our deadline, of course, but we have our deadlines set so that we can evaluate a student's application in enough time to make sure we nominate them to the partner with plenty of time for their program, for their application to be evaluated by them. And so just to clarify for the timeline for application, students are only permitted to apply in the semester before they are going abroad. It's not just a suggestion. If your student wants to study abroad in spring 23 or fall 23 or spring 24, those applications are not open. There is nothing for them to apply to, right? So we are only currently recruiting and processing application requests for students studying abroad in fall 22, academic year 22-23, and summer 2022. So the fall and the summer cycles are the same. Over the summer, probably in June or early July, we'll open up the application cycle for spring 2023. And your student's deadline will be anywhere from an early competitive program in the middle of September to a more normal sort of rudimentary deadline that we have for a lot of programs, which will be later September or the first week of October. And every year it's the same. So, pretty much like deadlines tend to be in March or they tend to be in September.
That is super helpful. So there's 2 more questions that come to mind for me immediately. One is, sometimes there's these other study abroad programs that might not be one of the ones we partner with. What's our take on this? Like, do we recommend students pursue them? Is it really hard to get those credits to transfer to AU? Like thoughts on this?
Yeah, so we do have a process where the students can petition to go on a non-AU abroad program. So the details are right here, basically. So two takes on that. We do a lot of work with our partners abroad and with the programs we use, and we spend a lot of time vetting them and working with our academic units to find the most appropriate programs for every major, every academic area. So the burden to kind of petition is relatively high, especially for semester and year-long programs. So if a student can make a very, very strong academic case that they need to go somewhere in order to meet certain academic needs, and we do not provide that, then those are the ones we entertain. Now, there are a couple big caveats to this. If a student does this process, they will only receive transfer credit. So this goes back to what Courtney was saying before. They will not receive letter grade credit, which means that it is usually more difficult for them to use all those credits toward major requirements. That's the first point. The second big point is they will not be able to use any AU aid. So any aid that AU gives, whether it's need-based or institutional, they would not be able to transfer to these non-AU programs. If they have external aid, that's a different story. So if they have aid coming from the federal government or from other locations, that's possibly aid they could use, but not any AU institutional aid. Those are probably the big two caveats. Now, for the summer, it's slightly different. The process for the summer is not as, it's more flexible because it's not during a student's normal academic semester. So therefore, since we have less offerings that we offer officially through our centers for the summer, we are much more kind of accepting of those in the summer to do because it's not interrupting a student's normal semester. So therefore, students a lot of the times will look and explore these independent options in the summer. And we will then help evaluate whether or not it's worth petitioning to bring the credits back. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's not, but in a lot of cases, if they're not, it's going to be less expensive to do these programs directly and have the experiences and get those experiences and do it. And that's where we will really talk with the student to find out what the best option is. But there are processes both for the semester and summer to petition for a non-AU program.
Thanks. So we've been talking a lot about some of these like big broad brush questions, right? Credits, financial aid, priorities, academic alignment. And once we settle on those, I know that families often have some really granular questions. And so Courtney, maybe this goes to you. Can you talk a little bit more about the pre-departure orientations and kind of preparation? I'm also thinking, you know, how so many families end up with questions about how, what can they expect for student support services, right? Like there's a lot that we scaffold here at AU, and that's not always the same kind of range of, say, mental health or support services that students might expect at campuses around the world. So can we speak a little bit to how we're really helping the student prepare pre-departure for what life is going to be like in their campus abroad?
Absolutely, Karen, but we're doing that well before students get to the pre-departure phase. Every student who wants to study abroad on an AU abroad program is required to meet with the advisor for that program before we will open an application for them. That's a perfect opportunity for your students to discuss any perhaps academic accommodations that they're concerned about, anything that they're concerned about in terms of having support, mental health services, you know, things that they're used to, because we can let them know right at that point when they're exploring whether or not something is a good fit, right? If the student is going to the University of Edinburgh, that is a direct enrollment program, and a student will have access to all the services available to all University of Edinburgh students. That's visiting students as well as, you know, resident students. But it is not the same level of service that students have gotten used to in the United States in terms of the amount of offices that we have that sort of serve students sort of every need and every like avenue of support that's available. They're public institutions in a different country, and they're not built the same way that we are. So at the advising phase, your student should talk to their advisor in the AU Broad office about what they're looking for in terms of support, in terms of what their needs are. After students are accepted, we have a pre-departure orientation for every single student. So if your student is the only student going on a program, they are still going to meet with their AU abroad advisor. They're still going to give them a comprehensive pre-departure orientation that is both general, which we do through Canvas, that students can share that information with you as well as site specific. Now, if students are going to a site or a country with other students, sometimes the whole student group meets. Because of COVID, we are still sort of doing online pre-departures, but they usually do happen in person. And we hope to be able to resume that sooner rather than later. But that's where students are going to get nitty-gritty information about what exactly to expect from their structured program or their host institution. But there's always going to be a lot of cooks in the kitchen. There's always going to be support from the AU Abroad office and support at the host institution or the partner provider. That level of support can vary quite drastically. Our centers, for example, have, I would say, the highest support for students because they're AU owned and operated. But some of our direct enrollment programs are going to be a little bit more of a light touch. So students should talk about what they're concerned about right from the get-go, well before they get to the pre-departure phase.
That's great. So what if a student applies to more than one program and gets in? Like, does AU assign them to one, or does that decision rest with the student to choose which of those programs they want to pursue?
So if the student's being permitted to open up a secondary application, that secondary application is marked as a backup. So the student wants to go to Oxford, but if they can't, if they're not admitted into Oxford, they have decided that a secondary location that they would find acceptable for their academic and what they would like to experience was the University of Edinburgh. The understanding is that if they're admitted into their first choice program, that is the program that they will go on. And if they are not, then we have this backup that's non-competitive, ready to go. Students are not able to apply to two non-competitive programs to make up their minds later. We want students to be committing to the process and committing to their experience right from the very beginning, which is why we have so many advising appointments with students to make sure that they're making the best choice for them.
Gotcha. That's great to know, because I know there's been a number of questions about what do we mean by competitive programs. I know, for instance, I'm always hearing from families of students who are interested in London School of Economics as one of the notable competitive locations, and there's a lot of questions that go with that. It sounds like really the best source is for the student to work with the AU Abroad advisor.
Absolutely, because the London School of Economics in particular,
Yep.
Yes, it's a very competitive institution to be able to access for a degree-seeking student, but our exchange with them is such that as long as students are meeting the requirements, it's not what we would consider a competitive program. Our students who meet the requirements will be admitted as long as they have strong applications. A lot of the programs that are competitive either have space issues, so it's just this is how many students they can accept and that's it, or they are very competitive, such as Oxford, which I don't think would surprise anybody in the crowd that that's a program that might be higher level of selection. But most 99% of our programs, if your student meets the baseline requirements, then they will be admitted. If it is a competitive program, they will be advised about that right away by their AU Abroad advisor.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Courtney. We've got a couple minutes left together here, and I know I've had a number of questions from families in the chat. So I will reiterate, if we don't get to answer your question tonight, please just send us an email to auparent@american.edu, and I'll go ahead and route that so we can get you your answer. A number of folks have asked whether we're going to have this information available after tonight, and certainly we're going to make our recording of tonight's session available to you very soon. Typically, it's the next business day. We'll send that out to everybody who's registered. We also have a standing collection of the recordings of all of our webinars on our AU Families website, and we can share that out with you as well. Mark, I'm remembering, so much of the shifting conditions and uncertainty of the last 2 years with COVID. And one of the pieces of advice that we've been consistently giving to students and families about study abroad was apply to the program you're interested in, right? And the advisors for that country area and that program portfolio will keep you informed about all the upcoming changes. Is that kind of still the best practice, that if we're not sure of a commitment or of the standing of a certain session, the best thing is for a student to go ahead and apply to it so that they're in that loop and getting all that current information?
Yes, I mean, we're at this point in time, if we have any doubts about any specific location or program, we will tell that to the student very upfront. So either we say there's a risk, in which case we allow them to do a backup program. And if we certainly think it's not possible at all, we tell them up front and we don't open applications for it. So we are trying very, very hard not to go down this path where we're leading people down and having to pull something back at the last minute. I think we've gotten quite good at that because we've been able to kind of understand where those points are of risk. And so I think, that's why talking to your advisors, once you start in the process, you will get lots of communication from your AU Abroad advisor. If the things get serious, like I usually am sending notifications out to all family members of all students. So all emergency contacts for students, they will start getting updates as we move into the pre-departure phase to kind of let them know when we're going to each part of those phases. We still want to work primarily with the students because they're the ones we have to prepare for the experience. But we do keep all their families involved as long as they're listed as an emergency contact, and making sure that if they are, that's where we pull that information from. Then we reach out. Serious situations, absolutely. If there's like an emergency situation or something changes dramatically, we over communicate in those situations. So, and during a lot of the emergency we've had over the last 2 years, I was giving almost daily or even times 3 or 4 times a day updates to all family members about what was going on. So if situations get kind of more uncertain, that's when we start communicating more.
I love it. I mean, I think we've learned so much in the last 2 years about how to effectively communicate these updates with students and families. I know another question that's often come up, especially as students approach their departure schedules is, what does a family need to know in advance about planning for their students' health needs when they travel abroad? Do we need to plan for supplemental health insurance? Does the AU health insurance cover most needs? What advice would you have for families at this point?
So Courtney, I'll let you speak as I kind of navigate to some resources, okay?
Absolutely. So all students are covered during their semester abroad by our emergency travel insurance. That's going to cover them in the case that they have their appendix burst, right? And they need to go to the hospital and have surgery. It has a certain amount of coverage for they need a family member to come out and help take care of them, or they need to be medically evacuated back to the United States. It's definitely the break in case of emergency kind of insurance. We do discuss insurance with students and the pre-departure phase, of course. If students are on specific medications, we ask them to let us know that so that we can try to help push them towards resources early to make sure that the medication they're on is available in the country that they are where they would like to study abroad, that it's easily accessible, or that in a lot of cases, we can start laying the groundwork abroad with those offices that would be concerned with student health to kind of see what is possible and sort of what is not. Mark, I don't know if you had anything to add.
Yeah, I mean, I think honestly, because obviously in insurance, one is that we have all the very detailed information here on exactly what that emergency insurance covers. And that is insurance that every single student automatically is subscribed to. There's nothing they have to do in addition. The other big one is they have to always maintain insurance in the United States also, or their home country, because if a student in the most serious situation needs to be evacuated from their location abroad, that insurance that we provide them with does not cover them in the United States. So that's why understanding the cost of insurance in the United States, that is always maintained. And when we go through that exhaustively with the students to make sure that they understand they have to stay either on the AU insurance or their parents' insurance, so that they're covered in the United States in the event they would have to be removed from the location where they are. Our insurance does cover the evacuation part of it for medical emergencies, but it does not cover the coverage or the provision of services in the United States itself. Now, the other thing is we have a lot of health and safety information. So lots of information here about all elements of mental health, physical health, safety issues. We put a lot of time and effort into this. So we have a lot of resources here that you can do. And at the bottom, we have our own centers, our own COVID risk mitigation plan. So you can see in detail what we're doing at every location. Once we then move into the pre-departure, we give very specific guidance on each specific country and location. So we kind of start going from a bigger view down to a narrower view as we get closer to when the students are going to be departing, going abroad.
I'll echo that, Mark. I think that the resources available on your website are just stellar. I had a family member asking me today about how to arrange for prescriptions for their student as they plan to go abroad. And everything was outlined so clearly and simply with such solid advice. It was really helpful. So I think, families, this is about all that we've got time for this evening. Again, if you've got follow-up questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to us at auparent@american.edu. I want to once again thank my panelists so much for their time, and thank you, families, for all that you do every day to support your Eagles and their success. We'll see you at the next session. Good night.